In a world shaped by visible empires, battles, and rulers, what if some of the most decisive conflicts were never seen at all? What if behind the rise and fall of nations there existed a different kind of struggle, one not recorded in political archives, but hinted at in ancient texts? This is the mystery found in chapter 10 of the book of Daniel, a passage that has intrigued historians, theologians, and readers for centuries. And at the center of it, a figure described only as the Prince of Persia. Who or what was this presence? And what might this narrative reveal about how ancient people understood power, history, and the unseen? To explore that, we need to step back, far beyond our modern world, into the life of a man who lived through one of the most transformative periods in ancient history, Daniel. Daniel is not just a religious figure, he is also a character rooted in a real historical context. He lived during the time of the Babylonian exile, a period when the kingdom of Judah was conquered by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Many of its people were taken into captivity, including young men of noble background. Daniel is traditionally understood to have been one of them. Over time, he rose to a position of influence within foreign courts, first under Babylonian rulers and later under the Medo-Persian Empire. This alone is remarkable. He was a Jewish exile, serving in the highest levels of government of the very empires that had conquered his people. But what makes Daniel unique is not only his political role, it is the way his story blends history with spiritual reflection. The book of Daniel presents him as someone deeply committed to prayer, discipline, and faith, even while navigating complex political realities. And it is in this setting, late in his life under Persian rule, that chapter 10 takes place. By this point, the Babylonian Empire had fallen. The Persian Empire had risen to dominance, led by rulers such as Cyrus the Great. For many Jewish exiles, this was a time of cautious hope. Cyrus had allowed some of them to return to their homeland and begin rebuilding Jerusalem. But the process was slow, difficult, uncertain, and Daniel, now an older man, remained deeply concerned about the future of his people. The text tells us that he entered a period of mourning and fasting, lasting 3 weeks. He abstained from rich food. He refrained from comfort. He focused entirely on seeking understanding. This detail is important because it shows that what follows is not presented as a casual experience, but as something connected to intentional reflection, discipline, and spiritual searching. Then, after these 3 weeks, something happens. Daniel describes an encounter. He sees a figure, radiant, overwhelming in appearance, difficult to describe in ordinary terms. The text uses symbolic language: a body like beryl, a face like lightning, eyes like flaming torches. Whether understood literally or symbolically, the description conveys intensity, awe, and a sense of something beyond the ordinary. Daniel's reaction is immediate. He becomes weak, overwhelmed, unable to stand. Even those who were with him, the text says, did not see the figure, but they felt something, fear, trembling. They fled. This moment is one of the most discussed aspects of the chapter because it suggests a distinction between what is seen and what is perceived. Daniel sees, others sense. And already, the narrative begins to introduce the idea that reality may include layers, not all of which are equally visible. Then, the figure speaks. And what he says introduces one of the most mysterious elements in the entire passage. He tells Daniel that his prayer had been heard from the very first day, but the answer was delayed. Why? because according to the text, he was resisted for 21 days by what is described as the prince of the kingdom of Persia. This is where the narrative shifts from historical context into theological interpretation. The prince of Persia is not described as a human ruler. Instead, many traditional interpretations understand this figure as a spiritual being, associated in some way with the region or empire of Persia. It is important to pause here. This interpretation comes from religious and theological frameworks. It is not something that can be verified through historical or scientific methods. Rather, it reflects how the authors and early readers of the text understood the relationship between earthly events and spiritual realities. In this worldview, nations were not only political entities, but were also seen as having spiritual dimensions. The delay in the message reaching Daniel is explained as a kind of conflict, not between human armies, but between spiritual forces. Eventually, the messenger says he was able to continue his journey because of assistance from another figure, identified as Michael, described elsewhere in the text as a protector or guardian. Again, this introduces symbolic and theological language. It reflects a structured understanding of the unseen world, one in which different entities have roles, influence, and even opposition. For modern readers, this raises important questions. How should this passage be understood today? Is it meant to describe literal events in an unseen realm, or is it a symbolic way of expressing the idea that history is complex, that outcomes are influenced by forces beyond immediate perception? Scholars approach this text in different ways. Some interpret it within the context of ancient Near Eastern beliefs, where it was common to associate nations with divine or semi-divine beings. Others read it as part of apocalyptic literature, a genre that uses vivid imagery and symbolic language to communicate deeper truths about struggle, hope, and perseverance. What is clear is that the passage is not focused on creating fear. Instead, it emphasizes persistence. Daniel's prayer was heard, even though the answer did not come immediately. This alone is a powerful idea, regardless of how one interprets the details of the narrative. It suggests that delay does not necessarily mean absence, that unseen processes, whether spiritual, psychological, or historical, may take time to unfold, and that human perspective is often limited. At this point, it is worth reflecting. What do you think this passage really means today? Could there be more behind history than we understand? Not in the sense of hidden conspiracies or secret control, but in the sense that reality itself may be more layered, more complex than what is immediately visible. Ancient texts like this one invite us to think in those terms. They do not demand a single interpretation, but they do challenge the assumption that everything can be reduced to what is seen on the surface. And perhaps that is part of their enduring relevance. As we continue, we will explore more deeply how this passage has been interpreted across time, and how its themes connect in a careful and thoughtful way to how we understand the world today. Now let's deepen our understanding of the historical and cultural backdrop that shapes Daniel's vision. To do this, we must return to the Persian Empire, a vast and powerful kingdom that stretched from the Indus River in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west. It was the largest empire the world had seen at that time, and its administration was complex, structured, and often overwhelming to those living under its rule. For Daniel, an older Jewish exile, navigating this empire meant more than just political acumen. It required moral resilience and spiritual clarity. The Persian rulers are often remembered for their policies of tolerance toward conquered peoples. Cyrus the Great, in particular, is praised in the Bible for allowing the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Yet even in this climate of relative freedom, the challenges were immense. The exiles faced logistical, cultural, and political obstacles, and the struggle to maintain identity, faith, and hope was ongoing. Chapter 10 opens with Daniel's profound mourning. This is not a superficial act of sadness, but a period of fasting and reflection, a deliberate withdrawal from comfort to focus entirely on prayer and understanding. For 3 weeks he abstains from meat, wine, and rich foods, immersing himself in devotion and contemplation. This ritual highlights a timeless principle. Seeking understanding often requires discipline, patience, and sacrifice. It is after this sustained period of focus that Daniel sees the vision. The figure described is extraordinary. Shining garments, eyes like flames, voice like a multitude, yet distinctly separate from the natural world. Scholars often note that the vivid imagery serves both as a symbolic representation of divine authority and as a narrative device to communicate the awe-inspiring nature of what Daniel is encountering. In other words, the vision is designed to signal that Daniel is witnessing something outside ordinary human experience. Here the text introduces the Prince of Persia, a term that has sparked centuries of debate. In the context of Daniel, this prince is widely interpreted as a spiritual entity, representing resistance or opposition within the cosmic order. The passage indicates that the angelic messenger could not reach Daniel immediately because he was delayed by this figure, a notion that underscores a deeper understanding of history and conflict in theological terms. Events in the physical world, according to this framework, are intertwined with unseen spiritual dynamics. Importantly, the narrative emphasizes persistence. Daniel's prayers were not ignored, they were delayed. This distinction is crucial. It teaches a lesson relevant both historically and spiritually. Patience, perseverance, and faith in the face of apparent delay are central to human experience. The messenger's eventual arrival, aided by Michael, introduces the concept of divine assistance. Michael acts as a guardian or protector, suggesting that spiritual forces are aligned in support of justice, faithfulness, and the faithful remnant of God's people. For modern readers, this chapter provides an opportunity to reflect on the broader patterns of history. Nations rise and fall, empires expand and collapse, yet human beings consistently face challenges that require endurance and moral courage. Daniel's story exemplifies the timeless struggle of maintaining integrity and devotion amid overwhelming circumstances. Another important aspect is the symbolic nature of the text. While ancient readers may have understood these princes as literal spiritual beings influencing earthly nations, contemporary interpretation can also view them as metaphors for political pressures, internal struggles, or societal obstacles. In other words, whether literal or symbolic, the text communicates that forces beyond our immediate control often shape outcomes, and that persistent effort, grounded in moral and spiritual awareness, is crucial. This invites a reflective question. Could the Prince of Persia represent more than a spiritual being? Could it symbolize the unseen, complex influences, social, political, or psychological, that shape the course of history? While we cannot answer definitively, this perspective allows us to connect the ancient text with modern understanding. without promoting fear, conspiracy, or division. Throughout history, interpretations of Daniel 10 have varied. Jewish scholars, Christian theologians, and historians have each offered insights. Some emphasize the apocalyptic vision, the idea that the cosmos itself is engaged in a moral and spiritual drama. Others focus on historical allegory, linking the text to real geopolitical events in the Near East. What unites these perspectives is the recognition that the text addresses the interplay between human action, divine providence, and unseen influence. An idea that remains thought-provoking today. As we consider these layers, it becomes clear why this passage has enduring relevance. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to recognize the complexity of forces at work in our lives and in the world, and to maintain integrity and reflection even when outcomes are not immediate. So let me ask you, how do you see unseen forces operating in history or in your own life? Could there be more shaping our world than meets the eye? How might understanding these dynamics help us act with wisdom, patience, and discernment in the face of challenges? As we move to the next part of the video, we will explore how theologians, historians, and biblical scholars have interpreted the Prince of Persia across centuries, and what lessons this passage offers for today's viewers in a broader, educational, and thoughtful context. This will help connect the ancient text to timeless principles of insight, patience, and moral reflection, while keeping our discussion grounded in careful scholarship and responsible interpretation. Now, in this final part, we turn to the theological interpretations, the lessons for today, and a reflection that invites each viewer to think deeply about the text and its implications. The figure of the Prince of Persia has been interpreted in multiple ways over the centuries. In traditional Jewish and Christian readings, this being is understood as a spiritual force associated with a specific nation, Persia in this case, acting in opposition to God's purposes. The messenger who comes to Daniel represents God's intervention in human history, aided by Michael, the archangel, who is described as a protector of Israel. It's crucial to remember that these interpretations are theological, symbolic, and literary. They are not scientific claims. They are meant to convey spiritual truths and moral lessons about perseverance, faith, and divine oversight in the midst of human struggle. Daniel's encounter is also an early example of what later Christian and Jewish traditions would call angelic mediation. Angels in these texts are not simply supernatural beings. They function as intermediaries, messengers, and guardians. Their appearance in Scripture signals moments of divine significance, reminding readers that there may be unseen forces influencing events, yet always under the authority of God. This brings us to one of the central themes of Daniel 10, patience and persistence. Daniel prayed for understanding, and even though the answer was delayed, it eventually arrived. This teaches an important lesson applicable not only in spiritual life, but in everyday human experience. Meaningful change and insight often require sustained effort and enduring faith, even when results are not immediately visible. At this point, it is valuable to reflect on how this ancient text can be applied thoughtfully to modern life. While we should not draw direct parallels to contemporary nations or conflicts, we can recognize that the principles of perseverance, ethical courage, and thoughtful reflection are timeless. History itself is shaped by complex, often unseen forces, political, cultural, and social, that challenge individuals and communities to act with wisdom and integrity. Consider this. Could the Prince of Persia be seen metaphorically as the obstacles, pressures, or unseen challenges that shape our lives today? And might Daniel's example inspire us to respond with patience, moral clarity, and disciplined reflection rather than reaction or fear? This is not about promoting conspiracy or fear, but about understanding complexity and the human capacity for endurance. The ancient text invites us to engage critically, to ask questions, and to seek understanding, rather than passively accepting superficial explanations. At several points in this video, we've paused for reflection. Now, as we conclude, let's take one more moment to think deeply. How do you interpret the unseen influences in history or in your personal life? Could there be patterns and forces at work that are invisible but still significant? And how might disciplined reflection, prayer, or meditation help navigate these challenges? Daniel's story, set in the midst of empire and exile, reminds us that integrity, faith, and patience are vital. Even when answers are delayed, insight eventually arrives. Even when the path is uncertain, thoughtful engagement matters. And even in a world filled with complexity, one person's dedication to understanding and moral clarity can make a difference. If you have followed this video to this point, take a moment to comment below. Share your thoughts. How do you see the themes of Daniel 10 reflected in history or in your own life? Could understanding these principles influence the way you navigate modern challenges? And if this video sparked your curiosity or gave you a new perspective, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it. Engaging with these ancient texts is not only about knowledge, it is about cultivating reflection, insight, and thoughtful dialogue. As we close, remember, history is never as simple as it appears. The visible is intertwined with the unseen. Challenges, delays, and obstacles are part of a larger narrative that invites patience, perseverance, and ethical reflection. Daniel's encounter with the Prince of Persia reminds us that what is unseen is still real in its impact, and that enduring faith and wisdom can guide us through even the most complex circumstances. So, take this story with you, reflect on it, share it, and continue exploring the mysteries of history, scripture, and human experience, knowing that even in the unseen, there is order, purpose, and the opportunity for growth. Thank you for watching. What do you think this passage really means today? Could there be more behind history than we understand? Comment below, and let's continue this conversation together.